Story number one. The haunted costume shop. It was a crisp Halloween evening, and Emma was excited. This year was special. She was finally going trick-or-treating on her own, without her parents hovering over her. It felt like a rite of passage, and she was determined to make the most of it. Emma, along with her two friends, had spent hours picking out the perfect costumes. She was a creepy clown, complete with black and white makeup, a bulbous red nose, and wild, unkempt hair. Her friends, Alex and Ben, one as a scarecrow and a ghostly pumpkin-headed figure. The night was young, and they had already visited dozens of houses. But as the night wore on, the streets started to empty. The trick-or-treaters thinned out, and Emma felt a strange pull in the air. The usual festive cheer seemed to have faded, replaced by an eerie quiet. "Hey, I think I saw a new shop down that alley," Alex said, pointing toward a narrow passage between two older buildings. "Let's check it out." Ben hesitated. "I don't know, it looks kind of off." But Emma, ever the adventurer, tugged on his sleeve. "Come on, it'll be fun. Halloween's about the weird and the creepy, right?" Reluctantly, Ben followed them down the alley. The narrow path was dimly lit by flickering street lamps, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. At the end of the alley stood a small shop, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. The haunted costume shop was painted on the sign in faded, crooked letters. The windows were obscured with dust, making it impossible to see inside. "Does this even look like a store to you?" Ben asked, nervously eyeing the boarded-up windows. "It's perfect," Emma replied, already walking toward the door. "You never know what you'll find in places like this on Halloween." The door creaked open, its hinges protesting as they stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of old fabric and something else, something metallic like blood. The dim light inside made everything appear surreal, as if the shadows were alive, stretching out toward them. Behind the counter stood an elderly man with a thin, gray beard and a weathered face. His eyes were so pale they appeared almost white, and his expression was one of eerie serenity. "Welcome, children," he said, his voice raspy but calm. "Looking for something special?" "I guess we're just browsing," Alex muttered, his voice uneasy. The old man nodded slowly. "Take your time," he whispered. "The perfect costume always finds the perfect wearer." The three friends exchanged glances, each sensing that something wasn't quite right. But Emma, eager for something unique, wandered deeper into the shop, running her fingers over the rows of costumes. Then her eyes landed on something that sent a chill down her spine, a clown mask. Unlike anything she had ever seen, it looked as though it had been crafted from the skin of an actual person. The eyes were wide and hollow, a smile too perfect, too eerie. It was almost as though the mask was alive. "I'll take this one," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. The shopkeeper smiled and nodded. "A wise choice," he replied. "But be careful. Some masks have a mind of their own." Ignoring the unsettling words, Emma brought the mask to the counter. The shopkeeper's gaze seemed to linger on her for just a moment longer than necessary, as if he was studying her soul. As they left the shop, Emma felt a strange sense of unease. She hadn't realized it before, but there was something about the mask that felt too real. The skin was soft, almost like human flesh, and the eyes, though empty, seemed to follow her every movement. But she shrugged it off, thinking it was just her imagination running wild. Later that night, while sitting on the curb outside Ben's house, Emma slipped the mask over her face. At first, it was like any other Halloween mask. But then something strange happened. The world around her began to blur, the sounds of children laughing and cars passing fading into an eerie silence. Emma felt dizzy, like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. The world seemed to grow darker, as though the shadows were creeping closer. She tried to pull the mask off, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if it had fused with her skin. Panic surged in her chest as the mask seemed to tighten. Her vision darkened, and for a brief moment, she saw flashes, visions of people in pain, of screams and blood, faces distorted in agony. She could hear voices whispering in the distance, calling her name, but they weren't friendly voices. They were dead, as if coming from beyond the grave. Desperate, Emma clawed at the mask, but it felt as though it was part of her, suffocating her, controlling her. Emma. Alex's voice broke through the fog. What's wrong? She couldn't answer, her throat felt constricted, and her vision was spinning. She felt herself slipping into darkness. Ben rushed over and pulled at the mask, but it wouldn't come off. The more they struggled, the more the whispers grew louder, and the air seemed to thicken with an ominous presence. Finally, with one final yank, the mask came loose. Emma gasped for breath, falling to her knees, the world around her snapping back into focus. The mask, now lying on the ground in front of her, looked ordinary. But she knew that it wasn't. I don't know what happened," Emma said, trembling. Ben picked up the mask and held it in front of her. The once creepy grin was now almost too perfect, and the eyes seemed to glimmer with a strange light. "It's the mask," the shopkeeper's words echoed in her mind. "Some masks have a mind of their own." That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She kept hearing faint whispers, as if the mask was still calling to her from the corner of her room. It wasn't just the mask that haunted her, it was the feeling that something had changed. She felt different, as though the mask had claimed a part of her soul. Days passed, and Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every mirror she passed reflected something different, a shadow in the corner of her vision, a fleeting smile in the glass. She knew something was wrong, but she didn't know how to stop it. On Halloween night the following year, Emma returned to the alley where she had found the shop. But it was gone. The space where the shop had been was now an empty lot, no sign of the shop anywhere. She turned to leave, but in the reflection of the window, she saw the clown mask lying in the corner of the lot, as though it had been waiting for her. The whispers started again. Story 2, The Shadow in the Woods. It was a crisp Halloween night when Mike, Sarah, and Jake decided to go for a walk through the woods near their small town. The three of them had been friends for years, and Halloween was always their favorite time of year. They had dressed up in costumes, trick-or-treated until their bags were full. And now they were looking for one last adventure. "Hey, why don't we take the shortcut through the woods? We can get to the other side of town faster that way," Sarah suggested, always the adventurous one. Mike and Jake glanced at each other before nodding. They were both tired, but figured it would be a good way to finish the night with a little thrill. The woods were dark, the only light coming from the full moon overhead, casting long shadows on the ground. The trees rustled in the wind, their branches creaking like old bones. The path they followed was narrow, and the deeper they went, the quieter it became. They had walked this way countless times during the day, but tonight everything felt different. The woods felt unnaturally still, and the sounds of crickets and other creatures were absent. "I don't like this," Jake muttered, his voice barely a whisper. "It's too quiet." "Relax, it's just a forest," Mike said, trying to brush off the unease that seemed to creep into the air. "We'll be fine." But Sarah felt it too. Something about the stillness was unnerving. The wind, which had been so lively earlier, had stopped completely. She looked around, her eyes scanning the trees, and then froze. There, across the path, standing near the edge of the woods, were two men. They were dressed in dark clothing, but what struck Sarah was how still they were. They weren't moving, just standing there, watching them. "Do you guys see that?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Mike squinted ahead and saw them too. "Yeah, but it's probably just other trick-or-treaters. Maybe they're lost," he said, trying to brush off the tension in his voice. But Jake wasn't so sure. "No, it's too weird. They're just standing there." The trio continued walking, but as they moved, they noticed the two men seemed to be following them, keeping the same distance behind them no matter which direction they took. Sarah quickened her pace, glancing over her shoulder to see the men still there. Maybe we should turn around, she suggested. They're following us. Don't be ridiculous. They're probably just going the same way, Mike insisted. But his voice lacked the usual confidence. They turned a corner, taking a different path through the trees, hoping to lose the men. But no matter what direction they took, the men seemed to be mirroring their movements. Sarah's heart began to race. I don't like this, Sarah said again, more urgently now. We're being followed. Mike finally stopped, looking over at Jake. All right, maybe we're just overreacting. But let's get out of here. Let's take the shortcut through the other side of the woods. Ben agreed. But just as they began to head that way, Sarah stopped dead in her tracks. They're still following us. She wasn't wrong. The two men were now in clear view, standing at the entrance to the path they had planned to take. The moonlight illuminated their faces briefly, and Sarah could see their eyes were wide and unblinking, staring directly at her. The fear that had been creeping up inside Sarah now exploded into panic. We have to go now, she shouted, turning on her heels and bolting in the opposite direction. Jake and Mike followed. But when they reached the edge of the woods, the men were still there, blocking their exit. The trio turned, running deeper into the forest. The moonlight barely cut through the thick trees now, and the sound of their footsteps echoed through the woods. I think we're lost, Mike gasped, breathless. Sarah looked behind them, but the two men were no longer visible. Still, she felt an overwhelming sense of dread, like they were still out there, watching, waiting. Every few minutes, they would hear footsteps, just faint, quiet crunches on the gravel path. It was as if someone was walking just behind them, always just out of sight. They would stop and listen, their hearts pounding in their chests, only to hear the footsteps stop when they did. I swear I keep hearing them, Jake said, voice full of fear. We're not imagining this. Shoo, Sarah whispered, but her voice barely broke through the tension in the air. Listen, the footsteps were definitely closer now. But there was no way it was just the wind or an animal. These footsteps were deliberate, following them. Suddenly, Jake screamed. They're right behind us. He started to run faster. But his legs were starting to give out. But his breathing was labored. We're getting out of here, Mike yelled, looking for an exit, anything to escape. They sprinted in a blind panic, not knowing where the path was anymore, only driven by the fear that the men were still chasing them. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged from the woods, gasping for air. The familiar glow of streetlights was a relief. But they didn't stop. They kept running until they reached the nearest house. And only then did they stop, panting and staring back into the dark trees. I don't care what happens, I'm never coming back here, Sarah said, her voice trembling. The rest of the night was a blur. They stayed inside, watching the street from the windows, waiting for the two men to show up. But they never did. It wasn't until the next day, when the local news reported a strange disappearance in the woods, that they realized the terrifying truth. The two men had been in the woods before, but they had never been seen again. The police couldn't find any evidence, and the woods remained eerily silent. The trio never spoke of that night again. But every Halloween, the leaves rustled and the wind howled through the trees, Sarah would look back and wonder if the shadows were still out there, waiting for her to return. Story 3. The Midnight Caller. It was a late October night when Rachel, a 22-year-old college student, settled into her cozy apartment for Halloween. The crisp autumn air chilled her windows, and the faint sound of children laughing and trick-or-treating outside filled the night. It was her favorite holiday, and she had spent the evening handing out candy to kids dressed as witches, superheroes, and pumpkins. As the night wore on, the trick-or-treaters dwindled, leaving the streets eerily quiet. Rachel decided to relax and watch some TV. She was exhausted from the long day of classes and couldn't wait to wind down. Just as she settled onto the couch, the old landline phone on her coffee table rang. Rachel glanced at the clock. It was just after midnight. She wasn't expecting any calls, and her heart skipped a beat when she picked up the receiver. "Hello," she answered, trying to shake off the chill that crept up her spine. There was no immediate response, just heavy breathing on the other end. Rachel frowned. "Hello," she repeated, her voice shaky. Then a voice, soft but unmistakable, whispered, "Are you alone?" Rachel froze. Her skin tingled as the question echoed through her mind. The voice sounded strange, almost too familiar, but she couldn't place it. "Who is this?" she asked, trying to sound more confident. But her pulse was quickening. The line went silent for a moment, and then the voice replied, "Are you alone, Rachel?" "I know you are." A cold wave of unease washed over her. She had no idea who this was, but something about the way the voice said her name with such knowing certainty made her heart race. It wasn't a prank. It felt real. Too real. "I don't know who you are, but I'm calling the police," Rachel said firmly, her hand already reaching for the phone. Before she could hang up, the voice continued, almost casually, "You're already alone. No one's coming." The phone clicked, and the line went dead. Rachel sat there for a long moment, staring at the receiver in her hand. The silence in her apartment was oppressive, and the noise from outside felt so far away now. She quickly tried to dial the number for the police, but paused. Was it a prank? She had no way of knowing. It didn't seem like one. But what if it was? She wasn't sure she wanted to waste their time if it was just some sick joke. Her instincts told her to stay alert. She tried to shake off the feeling of dread that lingered, but it refused to leave. She locked the door and double-checked the windows. Everything was secure, but her unease only grew. She told herself it was nothing, just a weird phone call. Nothing to worry about. But then, as she turned back to the couch, she heard it. A soft knock at the door. Rachel froze, the blood draining from her face. She glanced at the clock again. It was nearly 2 a.m. Who would be knocking at this hour? Cautiously, she crept toward the door, pressing her ear against it. Her heart pounded in her chest. Another knock sounded, this time more urgent. She peered through the peephole, but saw nothing. Her mind raced. Had someone come to the door by mistake? Or was it the same person who called her? Her instinct screamed that she shouldn't open it, but the part of her that was still rational urged her to just check and see who it was. Rachel slowly, cautiously, unlatched the lock and cracked the door open slightly. There was no one there. She exhaled, half relieved and half confused. What was going on? She was about to close the door when she noticed something strange. A small folded piece of paper was wedged into the doorframe. Her breath caught in her throat. Without thinking, she pulled the paper free and unfolded it with trembling hands. The note was written in neat block letters, and it sent a chill through her. "I'm inside." Rachel gasped, her stomach turning. She looked around her apartment, her eyes darting from one corner to another, half expecting someone to be lurking in the shadows. Just as she began to step back inside, the phone rang again. "Hello," she said, her voice barely a whisper. There was a brief silence on the other end before the voice spoke again, almost mockingly. "I told you. I'm inside." The call ended abruptly. Her head spun. The feeling of being watched intensified. And she knew she wasn't alone. The feeling of dread had turned into full-blown terror. Rachel backed away from the door, her mind racing as she thought about her options. Should she run? Should she stay and wait for help? But the creeping thought that someone was already in her apartment paralyzed her. The air felt thick, suffocating, and every small sound in the silence felt amplified, like it could be the sound of someone approaching. She tiptoed toward the hallway, her phone still clutched tightly in her hand. She called the police and whispered, "Please, I need help. I think someone's inside my apartment." The dispatcher assured her they would send someone immediately. But Rachel could barely hear her own thoughts over the panic pounding in her ears. As she stood in the middle of her living room, trying to figure out where the intruder could be, she suddenly heard it. Footsteps. Soft, but unmistakable. Moving slowly, deliberately, somewhere in the apartment. Rachel's blood ran cold. She turned toward the sound, her heart hammering in her chest. And then there it was. The sound of a door creaking open. Her mind raced, trying to process the situation. Was it her imagination? Could the footsteps just be the old building settling? She didn't wait to find out. Rachel grabbed the nearest object she could find, a lamp, and held it in front of her like a weapon. She crept toward the source of the noise. And then suddenly she heard a low whisper from behind her. "You should have listened." Rachel spun around. But there was no one there. Her heart skipped a beat as she realized the voice hadn't come from the phone. It had come from somewhere much closer. Just as she turned to flee, the front door crashed open. Two police officers rushed inside, guns drawn. "Is there someone here?" one asked, scanning the room. Rachel stepped forward, her face pale. She couldn't speak. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. The voice wasn't just a prank, it was real. Someone had been inside, but they found no evidence. No signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing. Rachel didn't stay in the apartment after that night. She moved out the next week. But the whispers still haunted her every Halloween, every year. When the phone rang after midnight, Rachel's heart would stop for a moment. When she would listen, just in case. But she never heard that voice again. It seemed to vanish as mysteriously as it had appeared. Yet, every time the phone rang, the memory of that voice would send a shiver down her spine. Story 4, The Disappearing Trick-or-Treater. It was the last hour of Halloween night, and the streets were quieter now. Most kids had already returned home, their bags of candy weighing heavily in their hands. The air had grown colder, the golden hues of the pumpkins flickering as candles burned low. For Lily, a 15-year-old girl who loved Halloween, it was one of the most exciting times of the year. But tonight felt different. Lily stood in the doorway of her house, handing out the last of the candy to a group of eager trick-or-treaters. She had dressed up as a witch, complete with a pointed hat and a broomstick that she swung playfully as the children came and went. It had been a fun night. But as the minutes ticked by, the excitement started to wear off. The neighborhood was quieting down, and soon it would be time to shut the door for the night. The wind rustled the leaves outside, sending a chill through the air. As Lily handed candy to the last group of kids, she noticed a strange figure walking down the sidewalk. A little girl, alone, walking slowly with a small bag in her hands. She was dressed in an unusual costume, an odd combination of a tattered white dress and a white face mask that covered her entire face. The mask was unsettling, its hollow eyes staring straight ahead, unmoving. Lily frowned. It was getting late, and most of the kids were already heading home. Why was this girl out here alone? "Hey, sweetie, are you okay?" Lily called, her voice soft but concerned. She stepped outside and waved to the girl, who seemed to be walking directly toward her house. The girl didn't respond. She simply held out her candy bag, waiting for Lily to drop some sweets inside. Lily hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to make of the situation. There was something about the girl's demeanor, her eerie silence, the blank expression on her face, that made her feel uneasy. "Where are your parents?" Lily asked, dropping a few pieces of candy into the bag. The girl didn't reply, but instead turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the still night air. Lily watched her go, still feeling that odd sense of discomfort. But the moment passed, and she turned back to the door, closing it behind her. She tried to shake off the feeling that something was wrong, but her curiosity lingered. Who was that girl? And why was she out there all alone? As she started cleaning up her candy bowl, a thought crossed her mind. She hadn't seen the girl's face. The mask had covered everything. But she had thought the girl looked familiar in a way she couldn't quite explain. Almost as though she had seen her somewhere before, though she couldn't place where. A few minutes passed, and the doorbell rang again. Lily looked up surprised. She hadn't expected anyone else to come by. It was nearly 10 p.m., and the night was winding down. She opened the door, ready to give out the last few pieces of candy. But to her shock, standing in front of her was the same little girl. But this time, something was different. She was no longer holding a candy bag. Her eyes were now visible, peering out from beneath the white mask. And Lily could see a strange glow in them, almost as though they were glowing in the dark. "Can I help you?" Lily asked, trying to sound calm. And the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. The girl didn't say anything. Instead, she simply stood there, staring. The silence felt oppressive, as though the world around them had frozen. Lily's pulse quickened. There was something unsettling about the way the girl was looking at her, like she was waiting for something. "Are you lost?" Lily asked, stepping forward a little, her voice filled with concern. "You shouldn't be out this late alone." The little girl slowly tilted her head, and Lily felt a cold shiver run down her spine. It was a subtle motion, but there was something off about it. The way she moved, unnaturally slow, felt almost mechanical. Before Lily could say anything else, the girl reached up and removed the mask. Lily gasped in horror. The face beneath the mask was blank, like a smooth, featureless porcelain doll. There were no eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a white, smooth surface where a face should have been. Lily stumbled backward, her breath catching in her throat. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from behind her. She spun around in panic. But when she turned back to the door, the little girl was gone. Lily's heart pounded in her chest as she scanned a yard. But the street was empty. No sign of the girl anywhere. The silence of the night was deafening. She closed the door quickly and locked it, her hand shaking. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had she imagined it? The girl had been so real, so vivid. But now there was no trace of her. Lily walked to the window, peering out through the curtains. She looked down the street, trying to see if anyone was walking by. But there was no one. Just the empty houses, bathed in the soft glow of the streetlights. Suddenly, she saw something strange. At the end of the street, near the old house, she noticed a faint glow. The same white mask she had seen earlier was floating in the air, moving slowly, as if it were being carried by an invisible force. Lily's breath caught in her throat. The mask seemed to float toward her house. And as it did, she could hear a faint whisper in the wind, like the rustling of dry leaves. It was a voice, soft but unmistakable. "Come find me." The mask hovered for a moment longer before it dropped to the ground in front of the house, landing with a soft thud. Lily's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't move, couldn't tear her eyes away from it. Then the mask began to roll toward her door slowly, as if it were being controlled by something or someone. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and ran to the back of the house. She wasn't going to wait around for whatever was happening. She couldn't. As she fled, she could hear the sound of footsteps behind her, slow, deliberate, like they were walking right in step with her. Lily didn't stop running until she reached her friend's house 2 blocks away. And even then, the feeling of being followed never left her. When she finally told her friend what had happened, her friend gave her a strange look. "I think I know that girl," her friend said. I saw her once last Halloween. She disappeared just like that. Nobody ever saw her again. Story 5. The Cursed Pumpkin. Halloween was always a special time for Jake, Maya, and Tom. They'd grown up together, carving pumpkins every year and spending the night running from house to house collecting candy. But this year felt different. It wasn't just another Halloween, it was the year they decided to do something they'd never done before. This year, they would carve the perfect pumpkin, the one that would stand out above all others. Maya had found a new pumpkin patch on the outskirts of town, one that was older and less visited than the usual spots. The pumpkins there were strange, larger than normal, and a deep orange that looked almost unnatural under the setting sun. The three friends had spent hours picking out their pumpkins, but there was one that stood out among the rest. Jake was the first to spot it. It sat at the farthest corner of the patch, partly hidden beneath a tangle of vines. At first, it seemed like any other pumpkin. But as Jake moved closer, he noticed something odd. The pumpkin was perfectly smooth, without any imperfections or blemishes. It was almost too perfect. "Guys, check this one out," Jake called, crouching down next to the pumpkin. "It's got to be the one. It's almost unnaturally perfect." Maya and Tom walked over, both eyeing the pumpkin with a sense of awe. They couldn't remember ever seeing one like it before. The orange was so vibrant, and the shape was flawless. It seemed to glow faintly under the moonlight, casting an almost eerie aura around it. "I don't know, man," Tom said, running his hand over the smooth surface. "It looks weird, like, I don't know, something's off about it." But Maya, always the optimist, insisted, "It's perfect. We can carve it into the most amazing jack-o'-lantern this year. Just imagine how it will look." They bought the pumpkin and made their way back to Maya's house. The air was crisp as they carried the giant pumpkin inside, the weight of it making their arms ache. Once inside, they set it down on the table, ready to begin their carving. As they worked, Jake noticed something strange. The pumpkin didn't smell like a normal pumpkin. It didn't have the usual earthy, sweet scent. Instead, it smelled faintly of something metallic, almost like rusted iron. He shrugged it off, thinking it was just his imagination. But as he carved deeper into the pumpkin, something odd happened. The knife he was using hit something hard. He paused, confused. Pumpkins didn't have hard spots like this. He pressed harder, and the blade seemed to slide through it almost too easily. And there was a strange resistance that felt unnatural. "Something's inside it," Jake muttered, pulling the knife out and wiping it off. "It doesn't feel right." Maya and Tom looked at each other, exchanging a glance. Maya reached over to touch the pumpkin. But as soon as her fingers brushed the surface, the room grew unnervingly cold. She pulled her hand back quickly, startled by the sudden chill that seemed to fill the air. "I think we should stop," Tom said, unease creeping into his voice. "This is weird." But Maya, determined as always, wouldn't back down. "We've come this far. Let's just finish it. It'll be the best pumpkin on the block." Despite the growing discomfort in the room, they continued carving, trying to ignore the unsettling feelings creeping up their spines. But as they finished carving the eyes and mouth, the pumpkin seemed to change. The deeper Jake carved, the more alive the pumpkin seemed to become. The air around it shimmered slightly, as if the pumpkin was pulling in the light around it. And then it happened. As Maya was about to carve the final piece of the face, she gasped and dropped the knife. A dark liquid began to ooze out from the pumpkin's interior, thick and black like tar. It poured onto the table, spreading rapidly, almost as if the pumpkin itself was bleeding. "Whoa, what the hell is that?" Tom shouted, stepping back, his face pale with shock. Maya's hand shook as she looked at the black goo. "That's not normal. We need to stop now." Jake backed away from the table, his mind racing. "What is this? This isn't just a weird pumpkin, it's cursed or something." As they stared at the mess on the table, the pumpkin began to glow. its eyes and mouth lit up with an eerie green light. The room seemed to warp around them, the shadows stretching unnaturally. And the temperature dropped even further. A voice low and hollow echoed through the room, sending a chill down their spines. "You should never have taken me." The words seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. They spun around, trying to figure out where the voice was coming from. But there was nothing. The pumpkin, now completely lit from the inside, was still oozing the black substance. And the voice continued, growing louder, more threatening. "I will make you pay." Suddenly, the pumpkin jerked violently, its carved face contorting into a grotesque, twisted grin. The lights flickered, and the air became thick, suffocating. Maya screamed and tried to push the pumpkin off the table, but it felt as though it was stuck to the surface, as if the pumpkin had merged with the wood itself. The three of them backed away, terrified, as the pumpkin's glow intensified. Without warning, the pumpkin rolled off the table, bouncing once, twice, and then slowly making its way toward the door. Maya tried to grab it, but it was like the pumpkin was being pulled by an unseen force, moving on its own. "Where is it going?" Maya shouted. Before anyone could answer, the pumpkin stopped at the door, and the door itself opened slowly, and if beckoning it to leave. Then, with one last eerie, high-pitched laugh that seemed to come from the very depths of hell, the pumpkin rolled outside. The door slammed shut behind it, and the house fell silent. The three friends stood there in stunned silence, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. They tried to make sense of it, but nothing about the events made any sense. They had just unleashed something dark, something powerful. The next morning, they found the pumpkin gone. The patch where they had picked it was now empty, with no trace of the cursed pumpkin remaining. But that night, as Halloween came to a close, Maya noticed something. On the ground near the front door was a single rotted pumpkin seed, blackened and shriveled, as if it had been burned. And every Halloween after that, they could still hear that faint, twisted laughter in the wind, reminding them that the pumpkin they had carved had never truly left.